Let's talk about the ironically named American justice system. Normally, I would make the case that there exists a problem to be solved, but in this case, no sane person actually thinks our justice system works. It's hard to think of any part of it that actually serves justice. When we think of a justice system, it breaks down into three segments: capture, conviction, and sentencing. The capture segment is uncomfortable because we have overseers who are entrusted with weapons designed to inflict pain or death, and they're entrusted with the authority to demand the submission of any civilian. Those who do not submit, even if the overseer is breaking the law, become guilty of resisting arrest. And what this creates is a peculiar legal situation in which a law-abiding civilian may be involuntarily subjected to mortal danger and not have the right to either fight or flight. And this blows my mind, in part due to the absurdity of the legal scenario, but also because I can't think of any better alternatives. As it is, the power overseers are given puts them in an extremely high office. It follows that they should be paid according to that level of responsibility. We want our best candidates for the job. And they must be held responsible to that level of responsibility. The conviction process, as it stands, is a joke. Basically, if you have enough money, then it does not matter if you're guilty. And if you don't have money, then it does not matter if you're innocent. It is inconceivable to me that the prosecution and defense could ever be unequally funded, and that the outcome is strictly a binary guilty or not guilty. But again, I don't have any great ideas for how this should work. What I do want to talk about is the sentencing part. While there are a number of obvious things that could be done to improve the logic and method of our current system, I want to focus on the theoretical limit of a perfectly ideal sentencing process. I believe there is value in identifying the theoretical limit so that discussions on incremental steps towards the ideal can have a clear sense of direction. Brainstorming on this, I came up with 6 reasons behind sentencing. 4 of these actually serve a pragmatic purpose, and a free society can only entertain 3 of them. The first is punishment. This ties into our carnal sense of justice, that bad actions are met proportionally to negative consequences. And it ties into our desire for revenge, to inflict suffering on those who have caused us harm in some way. However, punishment does not directly serve any actual purpose. Therefore, it's not among the 4 functions. The function of deterrent is an indirect function of punishment. The idea is that people in society who see what happens to convicts of certain crimes will be demotivated in committing those crimes out of fear of the consequences. The notion of making choices on the premise of causality, actions have consequences, makes sense on a personal level. However, my distrust of the virtue of government makes me not want fear to be a tool in the governing toolbox. Besides, the land of the free cannot be ruled by fear and still be free. A free society would not use criminal sentencing for the purpose of deterring crime. The function of correction is also an indirect function of punishment, but it is distinct in the sense that it is intended to accomplish something. Correction is motivated for the offender and for society rather than for any individual's feelings or desires. The function of correction is to reconfigure the modus operandi of convicted criminals such that they can be allowed to re-enter society and live life. The objective being both to give life to the convicts and to make the remainder of their lives beneficial to society. There are 2 main considerations here. One is the practical consideration of whether or not the expected value added to society exceeds the cost of habilitation, the economic consideration of benefit to society justifying the investment. And second, the moral consideration is how much is the well-being of a single person worth in context of what society is capable of providing. So, if A is the achievable value benefit to society, function of the age, talents, and education of the individual, but averaged across all people for the sake of impartiality, and B is the socially available resources to invest in individuals based on their fundamental human value, and C is the cost differential between rehabilitation and permanent imprisonment, then rehabilitation should be done if C is less than the maximum of A or B. The next is artificial causality. This is somewhere between a deterrence and correction, but I couldn't really fit in with either of those. Generally, positive actions are supposed to bring positive results, and negative actions are supposed to bring negative results. But it is very often the case that negative actions for society bring positive results to the individual. Therefore, the punishment for such crimes must always be greater than, but still proportionate to, the risk, R, times the benefit of committing the crime, B. And the punishment I refer to is a marginal punishment, which is the penalty P minus the benefit. So, P minus B must be greater than R times B. This function only applies to rational criminals, who can be deterred if they know that the cost of the crime is greater than the profit. You can be certain that bankers and CEOs use basically this formula. And currently for white-collar crimes, the penalty is usually much smaller than the benefit. The so-called hand slap is really a less than zero punishment, or a getting caught fee. This is distinct from deterrence in that the function is not to instill fear, but rather to remove the profit motive of the crime. It is closer to correction in that it preemptively reconfigures the modus operandi of would-be white-collar criminals. Next is restitution, which serves the function of minimizing the harm to the victim by recognizing that the criminal is responsible for inflicting that harm. However, this cannot be a function of the justice system because, 1, it may not be possible for the criminal to restore what was lost, as in the case of murder. 2, full or partial restitution may devastate the criminal, and it is always plausible that the laws defining what is a crime are unjust. Therefore, no life may be destroyed in the service of justice. And 3, very often the magnitude of the harm is greater than the profit of the crime. For example, stealing a laptop harms the victim more than it profits the thief because the data on the laptop increases its value, and the thief can only sell the laptop at the lowest replacement cost. So because restitution is not intrinsically a function of a justice system, I propose that its magnitude be limited to that defined by artificial causality. If a society wants to collectively provide restitution, then it may adopt that responsibility as a whole. And finally, we have disposal. And this is necessary to remove dangerous elements from society. When C is greater than the maximum of A or B, the person can only be disposed of. This function can be accomplished by permanent imprisonment or by capital punishment. If capital punishment is not to be used as a deterrent, a necessary restriction in a free society, then it cannot exist as a punishment because it does not serve any corrective function. The criminal cannot be rehabilitated by death, and artificial causality cannot be based on fear. As such, execution cannot be a form of punishment. However, life in prison is psychologically cruel, and I advocate that prisoners be allowed the option of execution if, within a larger context of society, euthanasia is permitted, such that death does not become a motivation for committing a crime. To summarize, here's a chart of the different purposes of sentencing and how I think they break down. Let me know if I missed anything here, and please note I'm asserting that any function of sentencing that is not one of the 3 acceptable functions is wrong. So please defend your opinion. Conclusions are less meaningful to me than the values and reasoning that they come from.